Call to order the Finance Audit Committee meeting. We'll start off with our briefings, our monthly compliance report.
Madam Chair, if I may, I want to take this opportunity to introduce James Carroll. James now the Vice President Chief Auditor for Metro, so I want to make sure the board all knows James and want to welcome him to the executive leadership team. Also note, and the board knows, that Art Smiley's now been promoted to the Chief Financial Officer, and Art will have the leadership role in these meetings.
And I want to congratulate both of you and thank Debbie for her service in this area.
By all means.
So, okay. We promise we won't beat up on you too hard. Only a little bit, right? Yeah.
Okay. My briefing item for the committee meeting this morning is the corrective action compliance report as of the end of May. And as you can see from the report, we continue to work very closely with all of our auditees to resolve all the outstanding audit comments. And as a result, there are no past due items this month. And there are also no significant changes or additions to the compliance report for May. So unless there are questions, that's the briefing item for audit.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. Art, you want to go ahead with the monthly financials?
Okay. Could I get the CFO's report brought up? The year-to-date sales tax revenues through May of 2016 is $519 million. That's roughly 1% or $4.9 million over our budget estimate. If you look down at to the bottom of the page, you'll see the trend has been down compared to our budget estimates for the last 2 months. We recently received Dr. Gilmer's latest Outlook document for MTA sales tax, and his report cites several key reasons for the downturn in our local economy. The fracking boom has ended, the downturn in oil prices was prolonged, and drilling activity is at its lowest levels in modern history. Looking forward to the end of this fiscal year, we expect sales tax revenues to be less than 1% under our estimate. This underrun is not a problem since we estimate that our expenditures will also be under budget.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So that's taking into account that when we do our cash flow projections, we already take a 1% haircut?
We took the haircut at 1%, and this we expect where we'll be at the end of the year to be a little bit below that.
Okay.
With regard to fair revenues that have come in, to date, it's tracking $5.3 million on the budget, with roughly half of that negative variance being associated with our van pool program. The footnote at the bottom of the page explains that the decrease in revenues was matched by a decrease in operating expense, such that the net impact on our budget was 0.
What we're talking about there is essentially a pass-through?
Essentially, what happened was we thought we were going to bring the program in-house. We didn't bring the program in-house, so the revenues and the expenses of bringing it in-house were
okay.
pushed out if we're going to push it out. So, paper transfers, we estimate that the impact of the paper transfer program was a negative $900,000.
And so the paper transfer impact will have ended at this point.
And the paper transfer
only applied to part of the fiscal year, and from here on in, they're going to hit us for the entire fiscal year for future fiscal years.
Right. So when we look at fiscal year 17, we'll see the impact of non-directionals for the entire year.
Art, I know that our boardings are up, but I think that, Chief, you and I talked about this a few months ago, that we probably now need to try to determine, how much of our increase in boardings is due to strictly to transfers and how much is due to new riders. I've got to believe that with the new network that we are picking up new riders, but also, it's obvious that the boardings would be up just by the fact that we're requiring transfers. And I think to really know where we're going, we need to take a hard look at that and make that determination.
Mr. Robinson, service planning staff is looking at that right now. We'll be coming back with a full analysis of transfers. You recall when we went to the new bus network, we said that we felt there'd be about 56% of the trips would be transfers compared to the old network, which was about 53%. So we didn't expect a big delta there. Service planning is now drilling down to do just what you've asked us to do, and we'll come back to the board shortly on that.
And I think the important thing to understand is there are a large number of riders who actually have fewer transfers under the new network. I was riding the number 25 bus the other day, which used to run only west of Wheeler Station. Now it runs through Wheeler Station. Half that bus was full when it got to Wheeler Station on the part of the route that had never been part of the route before. So everybody on that bus when it got to Wheeler Station was somebody who used to have to make a transfer and now was able to ride right through. And I've experienced the same thing on the Beechnut bus at TMC Transit Center. So we have a number of really important instances where we eliminated transfers on people's trips. So I think there are trips where people have more, but there are also other trips counterbalancing them where they have less, which is what accounts for that 3% change rather than something larger you'd expect, basically, if you just listen to public speakers. Because obviously the people whose trips involve fewer transfers aren't coming to tell us what a great job we did.
Well, in some cases they have, though. I've seen, letters and have talked to people who feel like the new bus network improved their life considerably. And I've heard from as many of those as I have from the critics.
I'll just give you an anecdotal. We were meeting with some folks yesterday, and again, unsolicited, we got the feedback that neighborhood, they live off the Montrose area. The neighborhood is the service frequency has improved so much, families can now take the bus to the park. Even if they're cycling, it's easier for them to put the bike on the bus and the bus rack, go to the park. We're beginning to get those kind of unsolicited anecdotal comments from people as well. So we'll try to capture all this, but service planning is going to drill down to make sure we can clearly tell the story that we need to tell.
Well, the last two factors on the page are weather-related ridership loss and other factors, and net those are down about $400,000.
So what do we attribute the weather-related ridership loss to?
In detail, I can't give you details, but we've had flooding, we've had rain, we've had more rain days than we've experienced in quite a long time. I think the last piece of information I saw on our rain for the year is that through this first half of the year, we'd had what we expected for the entire year.
And do we have any data on how park and ride fare revenue has changed compared to local bus fare revenue?
We'd have to, we'll get you some data on that. We know that the park and ride ridership is flat, but we'll get you some data on the revenues and
yeah,
what
no,
the
I'd
impact
be
has
very
been.
interested in seeing, and I think also rail versus bus. I realize rail versus bus is a lot more fluid because a lot of trips involve both rail and bus, so we don't really know what the revenue's going to just based on where it's collected. But I think the park and ride versus local comparison would be really interesting.
Okay, we'll get you something on that. It does work. Going the wrong way. This next slide shows year-to-date budget results for our expenditures. The operating budget is below estimate by 5.2%, roughly $19 million. Labor costs, union and non-union combined, make up about a quarter of the underrun. The bulk of the underspending, however, occurred in the services and purchase transportation areas. About 6.7 was related to services, 3.2 to public purchase transportation. And when you look at the 3.2 that's purchase transportation, a lot of that is van pool, the 2.7 million that was the in and out that netted to zero that we talked about earlier. Fuel and utilities are under budget by roughly $3 million, in part due to lower than expected gasoline and diesel fuel prices. Second line, Metrolift is operating pretty close to its budget. The overrun shown in the GMP budget of 33% is explained in the footnote at the bottom of the page, and we talked about, last meeting we talked about putting the footnote at the bottom of the page to explain what that overrun for GMP was.
Accounting question here. Would there be a way to really, I mean, the GMP is essentially a lockbox. We put money into that lockbox every month, and it has no impact on the rest of the agency how quickly or slowly that money leaves the lockbox. Is there an accounting way to recognize it that way and basically separate it out as a separate budget? Because I think that these variances we get in GMP, which basically have to do with when money is requested compared to when we get it, sometimes have a really big impact when we're looking at year-to-date budget overall, and I think that's confusing and gives a incorrect impression of what's actually happening. So I would love to see our total budget just expressed without GMP in it at all, and basically take GMP as almost like a separate revenue fund, say the way the city of Houston does it, that just doesn't factor into the total, because I think it would actually be much easier for us to understand what's going on if we did that. I really appreciate the footnote.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if accounting-wise it's possible to go further than that.
We can do that, but I really think the way to clear up this particular page is to take the 62 million out of what we show as GMP budget and only show the remainder. So if it's okay, I'll make that change and we'll see it. I'll show you a draft before the next meeting, but I think that's the way to clarify this. And then in fiscal year 2017, we can talk about maybe changing what we present, but I think for consistency's sake, we keep presenting it like we have.
Agreed.
Take this 62 out. I think it will clarify things.
I'm in total agreement. I think this is, if we change how we present it, we should make the change with the change of the fiscal year rather than...
Because this payment, it really applies to prior year commitments. It's a liability carried on the balance sheet. And so it doesn't really impact sort of the current year's budget other than the fact that we paid what we budgeted for.
Yes. Debt service budget is pretty much on target. Metrolift rail expansion is 44% under budget, and the CIP program is some 50% under budget.
Is the Metro Rail expansion, is that Harrisburg driven, or are those other items? Is that axle counter driven?
The largest piece in it is axle counters, and it reflects some of the Harrisburg type things where we are behind schedule on other things. So, but axle counters is a big piece.
So I assume basically everything we're seeing for Metro Rail expansion is a deferral of costs rather than an elimination. So we're below budget in the current fiscal year. We will not be below budget in the long term
we'll
in
catch
terms
up.
of this budget.
Yes, it's just a timing difference. And this Metro Rail expansion and the CIP in the budget process and the discussions we're going to have on the fiscal year 17 budget, we'll get further into exactly what those numbers are and exactly what's being pushed into 17 as opposed to expended in 16.
I like it that you say maybe we'll change the way it's presented, because like the Metrolift budget is really an operating expense, but it's just taken out of the operating budget, and Metro Rail expansion is really part of a CIP program. It's just taken out.
Just taken out.
So you're going to change up how it's presented, and you can drill down on those if people want to see it, but the overall budget is kind of debt service, operating, maintenance, CIP.
Right. But we pull them out because at some point in the past, someone has asked to see it separately.
Well, I do think it's important. I mean, in the sense of, like the GMP, for example. I mean, really what's important is right here, our fund balances, but also our any outstanding liabilities, because there were liabilities as it related to Harris County or the city of Houston, and if we're not seeing that, then there's sort of out of sight, out of mind. And I think it's important to know that we've caught up on those liabilities. So we're completely caught up, right, Art, on Harris County now.
On the GMP liabilities, yes.
Yeah, so there shouldn't be any other outstanding liabilities. Because Harris County submitted theirs, I mean, other than our normal budgeted.
My understanding is all the things that were passed
Yeah.
for prior
So City of
years
Houston's
have been caught
yeah.
up on. And so there may be some perturbations as we go forward, but no, nothing big like that should happen again. We should begin seeing basically the budget being pretty close to what the actuals are. This next slide looks at the portfolios, fund balances, and there's nothing unusual there. When you look at the ending balance of 531, it doesn't show any real major drawdowns during the month, but those drawdowns will occur in June. Our debt position is pretty much what it's been in prior months. You can see a slight decrease in our outstanding debt, and that's what you'd anticipate. Our debt will fall a little bit each month when we pay off things.
Art, is that reduction because of payments on the regular bonds as opposed to, because in looking through the reports, I really can't see any month-to-month change in reducing the commercial paper debt.
Yeah, I'll let, you got the answer, Phil? You got a working mic?
Yep. The answer, Mr. Robinson, is yes, it's the bonds and the contractual obligations. The commercial paper balance pretty much stays as it is until the end of a fiscal year when we do make a payment against it per our debt policy.
And we only do that annually at the end of a fiscal year?
Yes, sir. The commercial paper pay down is triggered by two things. Number one would be any increment from the general mobility referendum that we would get. If so, the board has directed us to use half of what Metro gets in the increment to pay down commercial paper. The other little piece of it has to do with the budgeting of the interest that we pay on our commercial paper program. Our policy says that we budget 1% interest rate higher than what we think we would pay. And at the end of the year, we take that accumulated underrun and put it towards the principal of commercial paper.
Which, of course, that means we're not ever paying very much on that.
This year, that is correct, because there will be little, if any, increment at the end of the year because of the sales tax.
I do think that's one of the things our cash flows take into account, that we've had a policy which we can change, and we're going to get into the parameters later, but that future GMP growth, how we were going to split it, and part of it was going to go towards, and I can't remember if it was a third, and a third.
50% debt payment, 25% operating, 25% capital.
Right. So we're sort of holding the course with the commercial paper until the GMP growth can start really hitting our balance sheet.
Correct.
Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
And given the economy and the impact on the financials, it's been pushed out further.
Yeah, it may be realistically 4 years before we see recovery in sales tax. It wouldn't surprise me at all now with the as the trends are beginning to unfold. It was particularly alarming to see Heinz walk its note at Greenspoint on those major buildings, which is a pretty good indication that they don't believe there's going to be, tenants coming in there, and that we've got about 10 million square feet of vacant space that's available for sublease right now, which is unprecedented, plus millions of square feet coming on, and all that is just a sign of the ailment that's in the economy, that companies have reduced staff and are not gaining staff, and all that eventually translates into less sales tax revenue because you have fewer people spending money.
So moving ahead.
Final slide has to do with fixed route and customized bus services ridership. And what it shows is that local bus is up 2%, Metrolift up 33%, commuter park and ride is flat, Metrolift is up 2.1%, and at the Star Van Pool program, it's showing a 7.8% decline. And that's largely a reflection of the economic circumstances that we're seeing in the city and the county and the service area.
One of the interesting data pieces, and Jeff Carlton did a great graph online, is APTA just recently came out with its ridership report, which lets us compare first quarter 2015 to first quarter 2016. Metro shows a 32% increase in rail ridership. That is the largest increase of any light rail operation in the United States, and a 4.8% increase in bus boardings, and that is the fourth largest increase of any of the large bus operators in the United States. What's notable about this is half the light rail operators and 2/3 of the bus operators actually lost boardings over that period. So we are dramatically outperforming our peers here. And the economy is definitely driving boardings down. And I think on most local bus networks like on ours, there's been a long-term declining trend, which I think is basically due to cities changing while bus networks don't adapt. So I think these results are pretty dramatic if you compare it to the rest of the country.
I'm just curious, I'm trying to, so on the rail part where it was up 33%, is that because we had a new rail to ride? So it went from, it wasn't there before, so it was 0, and now they're...
The jump, so if you think about that, it does take eastern and southeast north line. However, the jump, if you look at the ridership data, the jump happens abruptly in August. So the most of our rail ridership increase is ridership increase on the red line, which already previously existed, and that jump happened from month to month when the bus routes were reconfigured so they actually connected to that route.
Is there a way to see the red to red?
Yeah, because our monthly ridership reports show the light rail lines called out as individual lines, and I know most of that increase is actually ridership increase on the red line, which was already in place. And so the light rail increase we're seeing here is largely due to the new bus network, as opposed to the construction of the rail lines.
Chief, there is a growth potential for Metro Star. Of course, as you know, the county is building a major office building where the former Pine Park and Ride was. And there will be about 1,000 people relocated from other county facilities, including downtown, to that. And, there is an interest in having, bus service on Pinemont, but it occurs to me that many of those people that work downtown currently use the commuter buses to get into downtown. And there's really no feasible way to have commuter buses coming to Pinemont, but if this were worked right, there very possibly could be, a good marketing effort for Metro Star to get some of those people who've been riding a commuter bus, once they're moved to Pinemont, to start van pooling.
Mr. Rumsey, you get me the direct contact name. I'll have David McMasters from the Metro Star program work with him again to build opportunities going forward.
I have to say it's really disappointing that Harris County is choosing to move employees away from a place with good transit service to a place with no transit service.
Well, you got to put them where the demand for service is, and Pinemont is the geographical center of Harris County.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of locations near there that actually have much better transit service than Pinemont does.
So any further questions, comments?
If there are no further questions, and then that's my CFO report.
Okay, why don't we finish the last briefing and then we'll do the action items. The Mobility on Demand grant opportunity.
We're going to have Mary Fay is going to introduce our speaker on that.
Albert Line, who is a member of our grant staff, will be presenting the grant opportunity to you on Mobility on Demand.
Good morning. This presentation should be rather brief. It is regarding the Mobility on Demand grant opportunity. On the first slide we have just the general grant overview. This grant is a discretionary grant opportunity through the Federal Transit Administration. It was created to create innovative business models for public transit agencies. It is specifically geared for public transit agencies, and my apologies, you should have the paper-based presentation in front of you. Continuing with the presentation, the opportunity emphasizes on mobility innovation. It doesn't necessarily state that technology should be part of any proposal, but it highly emphasizes that technology be a part of the proposals being sent to FTA for review. A key requirement is that the project must be implemented within a 12-month period. Moving on to the next slide. These are more specific items for the grant opportunity. The FAST Act actually amended Section 5312 of Title 49. It makes $8 million available for this grant opportunity. $2 million for a specific award is the maximum amount. The opportunity, the authoritative guidance, allows for the FTA to provide additional funding. Of course, that would be on a discretionary basis. 20% local match requirement. TDCs are available and available for use for a proposal, making this proposal a 100% funding opportunity. Key partners are a key requirement for the opportunity. It requires that FTA allow eligible entities to go out and seek partners, and therefore waiving federal procurement requirements. Although Metro will ensure that state and local procurement requirements are also met, there is a July 5th, 2016 application deadline. On the next slide, we go into the pilot project specifics. Texas Southern University and Kimley Horn and Associates will be the key partners in this pilot project. It will be implementing a automated software technology for on-demand service, taking into account real-time situations such as traffic, things of that nature. The target areas will be based on areas that either have poor connectivity or non-existent connectivity, making the on-demand service applicable. Operators may be independent contractors or Metro employees as well. Moving on to the next slide. This is a bit more of the specifics on the grant opportunity. It is a two-phase project that will be developed and implemented in 2 phases. The first phase will take the models and analyze them in a closed and controlled environment, therefore taking any application development into consideration and making sure it is applicable to the zone that Metro deems suitable. Phase 2 will actually deploy the software into real-world application, therefore reducing time savings, things like that for our customers. What this specific proposal is getting to is making the efficiency of demand transit more palatable for our customers. At the current moment, our model allows for on-demand, but requires a 24-hour in advance scheduling. This application will take the software in real time, utilizing a mobile application or a tablet application, allowing customers to request on-demand service in real time. The goal is to have the service provided in less than an hour. The goal is 15 minutes, but we want to take into consideration the hour time frame. The hardware and software will be installed in Metro vehicles. Excuse me, the total project cost is $2 million with 100% funding opportunity with the TDCs. And again, the success will be measured based on travel and delay time savings for our customers. Moving on to the next slide. This is just an overview on the future possibilities resulting from this opportunity. This opportunity is a part of a bigger picture for the FTA. They are looking forward to more innovative approaches to public transit. If this proposal is awarded funding, it could result in potential additional funding down the road based off of the Phase 2 results. And FTA, again, may at its discretion provide additional funding to this opportunity. And that will conclude the presentation. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Let me see, I'm really glad that we're trying to get this grant, as I think as the staff knows, and probably the board members know too. I'm real interested in us trying to move into on-demand service. We've got a vast area of the Harris County that pays the sales tax, but there really is no service other than park and ride. And I know particularly in the case of Precinct 4, which has had tremendous growth out in the Northwest, there's not a lot of interest in fixed route service, but there are indications that an on-demand service would be a welcome thing. So I think the more we can do to look at this to extend transit opportunities to the people that if they were incorporated, they'd be the 5th largest city in the United States from the get-go. And to extend service to them, I think, is critically important.
I was curious about the sample size with Texas Southern and Kimberly Horn. Do you have an idea of what kind of sample size we're looking at for on-demand service?
So at the current moment, we're taking a cross-functional approach and including all the disciplines of the organization to ensure that operations are not disrupted to the extent that it impacts our customers. So at the current moment, we are still looking into what the sample size and the specific coverage area, whether that would be one or multiple locations.
And I'm curious about the real-time feedback. When will we be able to really analyze data, get real-time data, and see the potential impact?
That will be in Phase 2 of the project. Phase 1 will be the closed, controlled environment algorithms, making sure that the software is suitable for deployment. Once it is deployed, we will be having data that we will analyze on a continuous basis, and that will be part of the deployment of Phase 2.
Well, I trust you are going to make sure that the sample area includes that totally unserved area of Harris County.
Yes, that is correct. We are trying to gear the pilot for deployment within an area, a coverage zone, or for lack of a better word, in an area where poor or non-existing connectivity exists.
So can you just kind of explain more what the vision is for it? I mean, is it comparable to what, like the pilot we did, wasn't it by Acres Home?
Albert, I'll give you the first shot, then I may want to join in.
So the goal is to be bold and innovative and see how we can best serve our customers for the poor and non-existing connectivity that exists within the region. And ultimately, that is where we want to focus these efforts and provide transit and connectivity to fixed route if possible.
It's do you have the appropriate capabilities to understand real-time traffic conditions that would help you get a better service to your customers? And I'm going to use the community connector service for a moment.
Thank you.
This will also have some application to MetroLift services as well. We now say that basically we predicate a schedule on 30 minutes. We're picking up 2 pickup points within the community connector, and we feed them into the broader network. We basically are saying we do that within a certain time period to make sure we can hit that 30-minute mark. Does the real-time information give us a better opportunity to improve on how we're delivering that service so we can adapt with changing conditions as I understand it? On MetroLift now, we're basically restricted from the time to say we're going to give you a certain time, a 30-minute window when we're going to be picking you up. You've heard a lot about 90% on-time performance and all of that. If we get a better understanding of the real conditions, we can do a better job of making that mark, how we're notifying the customers of when we're going to be there. We think there's some improvements from all of that. I think Texas Southern has been working on this for quite some time. They think there's some opportunities to take it out of a laboratory and put it in a real-world environment. They're looking for us to work with them to do that. We think there's some opportunities to do some things.
But it's beyond just MetroLift.
Yeah, it's other
for the
areas.
whole- it's the
That's
whole
correct.
network.
We think there's some applications in other areas as well. And some of this will be a learned experience going forward with the demonstration if we get it. I want to emphasize there's only $8 million today set aside nationally for this. So there's no guarantees we will get this, but we think it's an opportunity to see if there's a chance for us to look at doing some things differently. Anything I'm saying wrong, everybody correct, but that's kind of the sense I understand.
I mean,
That's on
essentially,
spot.
we're talking here about the potential to do a community connector-like service.
Right.
Like a vehicle that circulates through a given area, does pickups on demand, and does not operate a fixed route. And trying to do that reliably and making it as easy for the customers as possible by using technology.
That is correct.
And the
Which
fact-
is what we did, what our pilot program was.
Right.
But the idea is to go beyond what our pilot is doing
Right.
to be able to run the same thing more efficiently.
And the fact is, we have rural transit districts throughout Texas that are successfully doing this, and if we could, find the right software and the right operational scheme, there's no reason why it couldn't be implemented in a major urban area like this.
No, I mean, and we know how to do, like, we know how to run that kind of service. The question is, can technology make it easier for the riders and more efficient for the agency, which I think is a great question.
That is.
I would actually say one thing I would like us to focus on with this that I think is a really interesting market is areas where we have employment that is spread out and not served by fixed route. That one of the big transit issues in the United States is transit-dependent populations living in urban areas that are served by fixed route bus service, not having access to jobs in areas that are not served by that fixed route service. And in Houston in particular, I'm thinking about spread out industrial areas, like areas around the ship channel where the density and the road pattern simply isn't there. And I'm also thinking about a lot of suburban employment that's on freeway frontage roads, which is incredibly difficult to serve. So a service like this that ties into a major transit center and then serves jobs that aren't on the fixed route system, I think is as valuable to look at as a service that serves residents that aren't on the fixed route system. And I think that's also something that the ladders of opportunity discussion that the feds are having, that they are very much interested in, and that might make us more competitive for this grant.
I'm kind of curious on the technology side. So if you're gonna have to put in infrastructure to be able to measure real-time traffic, because it's only as good as your input is. What is the input?
Well, software engineering is a tad out of my expertise, but from my understanding is that the software will be utilizing already existing metro infrastructure. It is merely just supplementing what is already existing within the metro vehicles, that being the technology that communicates between the control center as well as the vehicles. This will just take it a step further, taking into consideration and overlaying different things such as traffic conditions and where those inputs are coming from. I can get that information for you.
Ms. Castaneda, I will ask Texas Southern to come in and give a much greater briefing on this.
That'd be great.
Yeah, because I want to thank Texas Southern. They came to us with this. It's a great opportunity for us to partner with them. I think it's a good research opportunity and see where we go from there. But I'll ask Dr. Lewis to come in and really give a more detailed briefing on this. You'll note that the timing of submitting the grant is July the 5th.
That is correct.
The call for projects, I think, just came out. I mean, this is something that came out probably the end of May. I don't think it was any sooner than that.
I don't recall, but I can get that
But
information for you when it was
in our
released.
commitment back to the board, before we apply for any grants, we want to make sure the board knows what we're doing. So that's kind of a tight timing to get all this done as well. But I'll ask Dr. Lewis to come in and fully brief the project.
I had one concern here, and I know you've answered me on this, but I just want to make sure we're good. From a procurement standpoint, I want to make sure that having Kimley Horn as a private consultant on this project as a partner who would likely be receiving some funds without us doing a competitive metro procurement follows all procurement requirements. And I understand it's from our side, it's an interlocal. I just want to make sure we run all of those traps and we have a clear statement from our general counsel that we are following all Texas procurement laws in doing this.
Mr. Spiegel, I'll let General Counsel, but we have done that. I've had procurement look at this. I've had legal look at this. It would be an interlocal agreement with Texas Southern. It would really be their process going forward. We're comfortable with that. We did have a second pilot program, though, and thank you for asking the question, because we went back and drilled down on the second one. We thought we had challenges with procurement. That's why the second one has been pulled. We think it's a great opportunity, but we don't think we could meet the state procurement processes, so we pulled the second one. So I'm very comfortable, and I'll let General Counsel speak from the legal side.
That's true. That second grant application met the federal requirements, but not the state requirements. So I don't think that we were ready for that.
No, I mean, my concern is that even if Texas Southern, for some reason, did something that doesn't meet the procurement requirements on the federal level or on the state level, we as a grantee would end up being responsible for that. And so I just want to make sure that everything is above board so that this isn't something that pops up later. And I have no indication that it isn't. I just know it's an unusual situation.
I'm confident, and Mr. Kime's not here, but I can have is Mike here? Mike, come on up and speak to this, because I've had Mr. Kime really drill down on this to make sure that what we're meeting not only meets the federal requirement, but all the state competitive procurement requirements as well. So I'll defer to the expert.
Out of breath, sorry. Yes, as much as I can. I talked to Dr. Lewis yesterday. This was a pre-existing agreement they have. I do not know if they went through a process specifically for this, but I'm not sure if it's an on-call contract that they may have with Texas Southern, but it is a pre-existing contract that they already have. So they also have at their disposal is a GSA contract for time and materials that all public agencies can use. So in my opinion, given the information that I have, it appears to be on the up and up.
So is it safe to say that we're really tapping into something that was already implemented, and so I think that kind of removes us. It's safe to say that Texas Southern complies with current state procurement laws because they have to, and so if they've already went through some process to identify Kimley Horn, we're just really tapping into what's already there.
That is my understanding.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I do want to thank Albert, Mary, and the entire staff. They have moved very quickly on trying to accomplish some of these opportunities to look at innovative ways that we can improve our service to the region. And these innovative approaches are always very challenging, I'll just say that. So I want to thank the staff. I also want to thank Dr. Lewis and Texas Southern, because, again, they brought this to us, and we want to be good partners in working with them going forward.
But we don't actually, Chief, have this need any recommendation?
No, ma'am. This is simply a briefing to the committee
Right.
to make sure you're okay for us to submit the grant application.
Okay.
And then we'll keep the board fully informed of where we're at. And in the interim, as Ms. Castaneda's asked, we'll do a much more detailed briefing to the board so you understand exactly what we're talking about here. And we'll let the experts do that.
Okay. So we'll move back to our action items. Request board approval accepting the monthly committee reports, including investment reports. If there's no objection, through general consensus, we'll recommend it to the board for approval. No objections? Okay. Number 2, request board approval of the financial parameters and discussion of the budget scenarios for preparation of the FY 2017 business plan and budgets. Art?
Okay. Phil Brenner, our Director of OMB, is going to speak on the subject of the financial parameters. And he would like the working mic.
Thank you. Thank you. I realized I'm technologically challenged.
You're in good company.
Back when we had the mid-year board briefing, staff presented at that time a set of parameters that we were going to put in place for the FY17 business plan. Through discussions with the board, through guidance that we've received, we've modified the parameters slightly so that they coincide more with what we are the direction that we were given. Specifically, there were two parameters that were modified. The first one having to do with sales tax. Initially, the staff recommended that we would take Dr. Gilmer's estimate and take a 1% reduction off the first year only. What we've been working with the committee is to look at those assumptions and perhaps apply reductions to other years rather than just that first year. So pending the final guidance that we get from the Finance and Audit Committee, what we've done is reworded that first parameter just to say that we are going to reduce it by annual percentage as determined by the board. So it gives us the ability to go ahead with the parameters on an overall basis and then receive specific guidance and work that specific guidance into our cash flow and into our FY17 business plan and budget.
Can I just insert something here? If everyone remembers during the budget workshop mid-year that we had, a few weeks ago, I guess it was, we talked about, we have historically just done the 1% less than Gilmer's recommendation for the upcoming fiscal year. And in light of the economy, like Jim, you've said, 4 years, we said, does that really make sense? And the chairman had charged me to meet with staff, and they've been working through what does it mean if we project out, and we're to a point where the board, this committee, has to give some guidance. Do we stick with what we've historically done, or do we take a more conservative approach and do even a bigger haircut in the upcoming year, or as it's mentioned there, a declining percentage? So you might say 1% in the next year, 0.75% the following year, 0.5%. And the reason it's important is even though we're just budgeting operationally for the upcoming year, and that's what we're approving, the fact is we enter into capital improvement projects, various initiatives that actually, as we've seen, carry over, like the Harrisburg, they carry over to subsequent years. And we need to make sure that we don't get into something that we can't sustain, and this came up yesterday, or day before yesterday, wasn't it? That we can't sustain. So they're working on that. We've got to provide them some guidance on that today. So go ahead.
So that was the first parameter that we modified slightly. The second parameter that we modified slightly, and it's really only in wording and clarification, is that last bullet point where we talked about the fund balances. In the scenarios that we had been running for our cash flow, one thing that we were always targeting in all of those is that at the end of the day, in any fiscal year in the 10-year forecast, we would always retain at least $10 million above the reserves that we set aside based on the debt policy and the additional operating requirement. So we just wanted to make that a little bit clearer, and that's what the last bullet point is about.
And that becomes important because there are years out into the future, once you do these cash flow projections, in fact, that it gets pretty tight. So we have to give staff some guidance so that they can plan that future CIP.
Yeah, and the thing about a lot of I mean, if we look at future CIP projects, there's two kinds of projects on it. There's currently committed projects, and there's not yet committed projects. And when I say not yet committed, I really mean something where we have not started construction so that we could still hit the pause button.
Well,
And the not yet committed projects are a huge part of our ability to deal with economic fluctuations. That when you have a bad year, it's much better to say, we're not going to start building this new park and ride this year than it is to say, we're going to cut bus service this year. However, a committed project, once you've started buying land and you're signing a construction contract, you can't pause that project midway in any financially responsible way. So that, something like Harrisburg, it's committed. Something like Uptown, it's committed. Something like some of the other future discussions we're having are not committed projects.
Well, and that's one of the things that I've asked from staff, and once we tell them, give them the blessing on the sales tax growth, what sort of haircut, do we continue what we've done historically with just the 1% in the upcoming year, or we do some kind of declining percentage in future years for a period of time. I've asked them to come up with how much cash, once we meet the bottom parameter, how much we have that's sort of discretionary, and exactly what you said, Christoph, after we've met our obligations or our commitments, how much is there and how much we would see there for the upcoming initial years. So we would know that, hey, yeah, we can do this project and we can be able to afford to do it over the next 3 years or whatever. But if there's no money, we've got to make some decisions. So the intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, the intent is that we will have excuse me, another budget workshop once we have a discussion today on this, and we'll have another budget workshop where we'll talk specifically about the CIP based upon what that revised cash flow is.
Madam Chair, I think that is the intent, and it's also then to lay out to the board what is committed and what is not committed, kind of following up your discussion this morning, and then get board policy direction on where you want to go based upon available funding.
My microphone keeps turning off. One thing I would love to see is the sort of analysis of how much difference this makes. Like if we assume sales tax growth is X% less compared to if we assume it's right on the estimates compared to if it's a little bit more, how much difference, how much variability does that have on the overall budget picture? So that we have some level of comfort because we know they're all estimates. We have some level of comfort of our resiliency economically in terms of being able to deal with stuff being off the estimates.
That's what they're working on now.
On that second bullet, I don't know how I keep missing the meeting when we talk about that, but I don't feel like we ever really do. And, talking about sustainability, our costs don't stay the same every year.
Well, again, that's for the upcoming year.
Okay.
But it's like this is a mixture of the upcoming operational budget as well as what we use to plan for our cash flow projections.
You're assuming the worst case scenario is that. That's not the decision to say that we're not going to. But we don't, there's never a forum to actually talk about that one.
Yeah, well, and I think that's something, once we give guidance on the first item and the last item, if everyone's okay with that, then they'll give us revised cash flow projections. And there's going to be some decisions based upon some of the initial analysis that, basically there is no money, there's not a lot of discretionary money, and we will have to make some decisions that not only in the upcoming year, but in the upcoming year as it pertains to future years. Are there things in the CIP that can be deferred? Do we do a fair increase or whatever?
Policy for a fair increase.
Yeah. But we first got to figure out what kind of projections we want to work with and what our parameters are we're working. And then the board's going to have to make some difficult decisions.
Yeah.
And staff.
And then this plays also into, in a great discussion with the board at the retreat on Monday, as we're developing the strategic plan, first-year business plan, and how we go about meeting the board's expectation, that there'll be a funding of delivering those priorities as well. So it all begins to come together.
Well, and that was the thing one of the things that we talked about, and I think the chairman actually brought it up, was the idea of a future bond referendum. Well, part of that future bond referendum is making sure, in fact, that you've got the cash flow, even if you could get it by the rating agencies and get someone to take it to market. Are we going to have the cash flow to pay to P&I on it? We don't want to get in a situation where we're sucking all the cash out. Just
Well,
to
I
service
agree,
debt.
and not just to pay the P&I, but to operate what you're going to build with the capital.
So, wasn't there another slide? Or is that it?
No, the next slide is just the second page of the parameters, and this has to do with the budget change levels that were presented at the board workshop. They have not changed, and we're looking to retain the same authorization levels on these.
I do have some other comments on that previous slides in terms of development guidelines.
Can you go back?
So one thing is, we've said that the new bus network is a 5-year plan, and there are routes and frequencies that we deferred as part of the first-year implementation. I think part of our baseline should be here implementing all of those, completing the system that was actually designed in that process. Since that's what we said as a board when we moved ahead with the first-year implementation, we said we still intend to implement the 5-year plan. And I think those routes we weren't able to do and some of the frequencies we weren't able to do are valuable things. So I would like those to be included in here. I mean, I realize adding service is another one of those things that does give you flexibility from year to year. If you can't afford to add service in a year, you can always put it off. But I'd like us as a baseline to consider those routes which we as a board specifically approved and said, we're not implementing this in the first year.
We already said we were going to do it. We just need to show in the budget.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but I will tell you that's in the CIP. We've got a CIP plan, but in fact, we're not going to be able to do
Right.
what we thought, when we thought. It's not to say we're not going to never do it, but...
And I think we carry that as a separate line item. I think we can carry as a separate line item in the budget additional service under the 5-year plan. And this is an operating budget hit. I think we carry that as a line item so that we can understand its impacts and we can say, maybe we don't put this in here, but I don't want to ignore it.
And Madam Chair, we can bring back, because I've been meeting with service planning, they're ready to fairly shortly to come back to the board and say, if we implemented year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, this is what it looks like in a cost. And then the second is also looking at commuter service and how we improve upon that. That was a second-year plan as well. So we can begin to lay out what that looks like as we're going forward.
I think in addition to that, there are 2 staffing things that I think have to be major initiatives for this agency that we've talked about where I think we are understaffed. One of those is on the urban design front, which we've already put together a job description on. I want to make sure that's in here. The second, which I think is even more important, is passenger information. Like, I want us to have a goal of not just having high quality passenger information, but correct passenger information. And that includes things like detours. Like, to me, what we ought to have is that whenever a bus stop is out of service due to a detour, there is actually a sign posted on that bus stop that explains the detour and tells you where to go. And What we are missing in order to be able to do that is staff. I know all of the staff who does all of this, and they're all stretched too thin. So I think I want to make sure, I understand us being tight on payroll, but I think there are certain areas which are so important to the customer experience that we need to find the way to make that happen.
So my question is, do we change the parameters, or do we wait until the budget workshop, because it's sort of the guts of the
Right.
budget? You know, this is saying, here's sort of within this box, we don't want you to move financially outside of these
Yeah.
parameters. And then they prepare a budget, we do a budget workshop, another one, and in that, we set the priorities of what you're talking about.
And I'm bringing up now so that we can discuss it in the workshop. I don't feel like we have to add a bullet point to the slide as long as it's included. I just want to make sure that our baseline isn't to say, if it's what we do right now, it's good enough. That there are areas we need to improve in that I don't think are options. And then I think the final one that also goes into that category is, we have said we are doing a regional transportation plan, and I want to make sure that that's specifically included in the budget so we can pay for that.
So I think I'd like feedback on the first bullet point and the last bullet point, because that really it instructs staff what to come forward with in terms of the budget workshop, to be able to figure out how much money we do have to spend that's sort of discretionary, and where we need, if we need to shift something. What were the percentages we used? I didn't bring it, Art, on the various scenarios. Do you have it?
The first set was a 1% haircut in year one, so in the 17, a 1% haircut from the Gilmer estimate. The second was a declining 1% in the first year, 7.75 in the second year, 0.50 in the third year, 0.25 in the fourth year, and 0 in the fifth year. And the third was a 1% haircut for each of the 5 years.
So I'll just chime in here. I think we need to do something more than what historically we've been doing, because as we just saw in the financial presentation, you know, we've come close. And really the only reason is we've been conservative on the expenditures. And I just think it's better for us to be more conservative and not overly commit ourselves. And then if the economy turns around, you know, we adjust it accordingly, because we'll be budgeting every year. And then we can move something up that maybe is out in year 5. I would recommend the second scenario, the declining one, versus I think the third 1% for the next 5 years is probably too much. But that's my thoughts. Other?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think maybe the 1% for the coming year and for the following year, and then scale it down from there, because you know, we have not had one of these declines that didn't recover in 4 to 5 years. And, you know, people are going to still need oil, and there's only so much of it around. So that, you know, that's got to improve. It's just going to be slow.
Other feedback?
I think that's fine and conservative, especially considering we're revisiting it on an annual basis, so it's not like it's fixed.
Yeah.
On the 10 million, I'm totally on board with that. On the 10 million above, that is a minimum we stay at. That's not a 10 million a year. It means we have 10 million in the bank and we don't eat into it in any given year.
Yeah, and that's 10 million above
Right.
the 25%.
Right.
Okay. And our auditors, you know, I mean, the emergency reserve requirements we instituted a few years ago, because we'd always just had the 15%, and the auditors have always said, you know, it's kind of cutting it close. You know, we're not in the business just having a huge bank account, but the flip side of it is we need to make sure that we've got enough that we can sustain the agency.
No, and to me, one of the one of the worst things a transit agency can do is a dramatic service cut when in bad economic times, because that hits people doubly. It's harder to find a job, and now there's fewer ways to get there. So I think that kind of prudence, so that we can keep our system running, I think is very important.
So do I have a motion on this and include in it what percentage on the sales tax growth we would
I'll make a motion that we adopt this with the sales tax be 1, then 0.75, 0.5.
It's 1.75, 0.5, 0.25.
Yeah. One for the first 2 years.
Oh, you want one for the first two?
Yeah, because, we're doing it one anyway, and I think that would just be safer given the uncertainty, and then start the decline
Okay.
to 1, then 0.75, 0.5, 0.25.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, discussion?
I think Jim just hit it.
Yeah. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of recommending these financial parameters to the board and giving staff the guidance on the sales tax reduction of using 1% first year, 1% second year, and then declining 0.75, 0.5, 0.25. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, passes. So any questions about that, Art?
No,
You guys-
that's fine.
Okay. Any ideas in terms of when we expect to have the budget workshop? Next couple of weeks?
Ms. Diaz is
maybe?
going to work with the board's calendar to make sure we're ready to do it, and we'll get back with the board shortly on that.
Okay.
We need to do it fairly soon.
We
so
need to
can
do
get
it
the
fairly
budget
soon.
moving forward.
Yeah.
Mr. Smiley keeps telling me that, Madam Chair, so we'll make sure we do that.
Okay, so the next two items are pretty much housekeeping. Number 3, request board authorization to replace Debbie Scheckler with Arthur Smiley, CFO, as an authorized signer on the bank depository accounts and to engage in banking transactions. If there's no objection, we'll recommend this to the board per general consent. Okay? Number 4, request board authorization to appoint Arthur Smiley, CFO, as a committee member to the MTA non-union pension plan. No objections to recommend this to the board? Okay. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Okay. Do good. Go out and do good work.
All right.
I think that's it. We're adjourned.